1. When I was a freshman in high school, I met Alex. Now, 10 years later, I couldn't tell you why I was so drawn to him, or why I got so attached. He was homely and odd, and quite frequently smelled bad. There was a darker undercurrent that ran below his surface, and I thought I saw unspoken sadness that matched mine. And maybe as a naive 15-year-old, I had the stereotypical, we can save each other from our pain, bullshit fantasy. He wasn't the only boy giving me attention. In fact, he barely even gave me that, since he played me hot and cold. Emphasis on the cold. But he was the one I wanted. Every time I would start to pull away and give up, because he was clearly uninterested, he would pop up, calling me cute and making comments about how seeing me brightens his day. Then he would be back to pursuing someone else. I was 15 and naive and hurt. But still, finally, had enough. So I decided I was done. He caught wind of this and ended up asking me to be his girlfriend later that same day. I was caught off guard but thought, yes, finally. He must have just needed time to make a move. He and I dated for 2 years. And he was a hurricane the entire time. One example, his phone would be off for days at a time. He rarely went to school. And I just wouldn't hear from him. I would finally call his mom because I was worried about not hearing from him at all for 3, 4, 5 days. And she would tell me that she hadn't seen him either. When he finally turned his phone back on, he would spit venom at me and call me a crazy cunt because I spammed his phone. I would be in tears and try to explain I was worried because I hadn't heard from him in days and neither had his mother. And then he would call me a few other names and hang up on me and turn his phone off. The abuse came in many ways, but disappearing and then cussing me out and calling me names when I voiced how uncomfortable it made me. That was his favorite. I kept trying to break up with him, but whenever I did that, suddenly he was calling me crying and saying I was the love of his life and he was going to kill himself if I left him. After 2 years, I finally had enough and ended it for good. I told him I was done. I ignored his threats of suicide. He kept begging. School was out for the summer, so he couldn't find me there, which meant he kept showing up at my house, afternoon, evening, middle of the night. It didn't matter. He would toss bits of bark that my mom had in planters in the front yard at my bedroom window. He would sit out there for a long time to get me to talk to him. I didn't know what to do. I thought he would give up, and that it would be okay soon. One day I was walking home from work. I was a block away from my house, and Alex came, sidling up next to me in his car, pleading with me to talk to him. I told him I had nothing more to say. Then let me talk, please, he begged. He was crying. I had no intention of getting back together with him. But I still hated seeing him hurt. I agreed to let him say what he wants so he could get closure. I sat in the car and told him to talk. He started babbling incoherently and kept trying to make me feel bad for abandoning him. I told him the conversation was over and I was leaving. He locked the doors, and as I went to manually push the lock on my door up, he grabbed my arm and told me I wasn't leaving. I panicked. I smacked him and shoved him away from me and scrambled out of the car and ran the rest of the block home. He continued to lurk, spammed my inbox, drove by my house and place of employment. I ended up rebounding and started dating someone new. He was Alex's complete opposite and made me feel happy and light. However, once Alex caught news of this, he flipped out. He went ballistic. The calls and texts increased, both in frequency and in level of mania. he started hanging out right outside the store I worked at. It was a small store in the mall, so I could see him, just standing there, staring in at me. Management had to call mall security a few times, but he always came back. Eventually, his texts got threatening. He started saying things about how he hoped my new boyfriend was prepared, and he said that he was willing to go to jail to have me. My mom panicked and believed that I was on the verge of being kidnapped or assaulted. We had gone to the cops a couple times, but they said they couldn't do anything because he technically hadn't broken any laws. We took the threatening messages to them, and they said they would start to file a restraining order and go warn him that he couldn't go near me or talk to me, or he was in violation of the order of protection. He kept showing up anyway. One night, around midnight, the doorbell rang. My mom was confused and asked me if I was expecting anyone. I told her no. She opened the door, and there on the front step was a card, a rose, and a burning candle. We glanced up and down the street and didn't see anyone. And we were immediately spooked because there wasn't enough time for him to ring the doorbell and get out of sight already. You could see a long way down both sides of the street, unless he was hiding in the trees along the house. This went on for a while. He kept following me and showing up at my work, which means he kept getting visited by the cops, and his friends even got involved and started threatening me for what I was doing to him. Eventually, the order of protection was placed, and all at once, everything stopped. But my paranoia and fear and jumpiness lasted for a long time after that. 2. I recently graduated high school, and while I had a healthy amount of boy issues throughout my years, one is still stuck in my mind to this day just because of how creepy it was. I was either a freshman or a sophomore, and I was kinda small for a girl my age, very meek and very naive. My school recently installed a military academy whose students wore uniform and had their own separate building. So us students from the main school didn't really see much of them. However, a lot of the foreign language classes were in the military building. So for one period each day, I would have to make the long walk in the heat, all the way to the completely other side of the campus. Early in the year, when we began to pick up our textbooks from the book room, I decided I wanted to get all of them in one go while I was walking to French. It was on the way to the military building. It was a lot heavier than I bargained for, and the late bell rang while I was trying to trudge up the stairs. I heard a voice offering to help, and I looked up to see a boy, a little older than I, in a military uniform, smiling at me. Grateful, I said yes, and he held my books for me and walked me to class. He really seemed genuinely nice, and we exchanged our names and small talk until we got to my classroom. He put the books on my desk, and that was it. Or so I thought. Nothing really rang alarm bells at first. I started to see him more often around campus, which was strange because I had never seen him previously, and, being a military student, he wouldn't have had any classes in my building. However, I didn't think much of it. He started hanging out where I did after school, where I waited for my mom to pick me up. He offered me rides home. He had his own car, which I politely declined each time he offered them almost daily. At this point, something about him really started to seem off, but being incredibly naive, I brushed it off. He started showing up outside of my classrooms after each bell, and I uncomfortably would tell him that he really shouldn't walk me to class. He usually said that he skipped his classes a lot anyway, and was walking around. Whenever I'd see one of my friends in the hallway and I'd go talk to them, he'd abruptly leave. The things he said to me when he'd see me got progressively more sexual and lewd. so I got one of my bigger guy friends to walk with me to my classes, and he backed off for a while. It all sort of came to a head when I stayed very late one day for play rehearsals. As I was the lead, I had to stay longer, and most of drama club was either gone or still in the auditorium. Afterwards, I was waiting near the parking lot for my mother to pick me up. It was beginning to get dark out, when I noticed he was still at the school with some of his friends. Aside from a couple of students at the other end of the lot, it was just us. He and his friends walked over and we talked for a little bit. I grew increasingly more uncomfortable and kept saying my mom was on her way. He asked if I wanted to see something cool, and pulled out handcuffs from his backpack. In all honesty, I was just confused and did not realize how close he'd gotten. He clamped one end on my wrist and the other on his. He told me that the key was down his pants, and that I'd have to find it if I wanted to take it off. His friends were laughing and he started heading toward two double doors that would lead to the now abandoned part of the school where the portables were situated. What he didn't expect was that I'd start screaming. I kept yelling, "Get it the fuck off me," and just screaming and trying to kick him. He clearly didn't expect that from me. And he panicked and took the key, not in his pants, but from his backpack, and unlocked the cuffs, telling me to just chill out, that it was just a joke. I went back in the auditorium and stayed there until my mom got to the school. Looking back on it now, I sure as hell should have told the administration. But I felt silly and embarrassed by the whole situation, and didn't want to cause a fuss. Luckily, I guess I freaked the boy out too, because he never bothered me again. 3. It was Friday night and I had just got off from work. I was around 16 years old when this had happened, and honestly I was not a stranger to the dangers of other people's actions. At that age, and especially around that time in my life, no matter what I encountered, I was too sure of myself. I thought nothing or no one could touch me. Even after last year when I got chased. That is a whole other story. Short backstory. I had this friend, I will call Joe. Joe and me dated for a while, but we knew that it wasn't meant to be at that time. But we really remained close friends, and still to this day are. Joe lived a few blocks up from me, and he even worked at the restaurant beside the restaurant I worked at. So we were always together. Like many nights after work, Joe needed a ride home. Well, instead of dropping him off up the street, I just dropped him off at my house and he decided to walk home from there. That night my parents were out to a family gathering party. My parents had forgotten to drop the house key off to me earlier that day. So they left the key in the mailbox, which wasn't unusual since my parents always forgot to either tell me they were going out, or were always forgetting to get me a spare key, so our mailbox was honestly never used for mail but for putting the house key in. After talking a few minutes to Joe, I decided to tell him good night and head inside to take advantage of the fact that my parents were gone. I know some teens would have invited Joe inside if they were in my situation, but I was actually a really good kid, and my grandmother lived 2 houses down from me, so the risk of inviting Joe in was not worth my parents' wrath when they found out. I go up to the porch and reach inside the mailbox, moving my hand around, trying to find the key. Always made sure to cut the porch light off before I did this, because I didn't really want anyone seeing our hiding spot. Usually I would leave the key in the mailbox, but that night, don't know why, but I took it inside. I sat down and grabbed me some food, watched a little TV and decided to call a friend. His name was Smurf, and Smurf was a big guy. He also lived about 10 minutes away from me. As Smurf and me chatted about our night at work, I hear a weird sound. It was the sound of movement in the mailbox. I hit mute on the TV and told Smurf I was hearing something messing in the mailbox. He of course told me to go check, but the thing was, the door had no windows on it or even beside it. At that time my dad was remodeling and had not found the time to put in the windows. so it was nothing but a wall and door. I go to my room, which was beside the hallway where our front door was, to look out my bedroom window. I didn't want to cut the porch light on, because A, I was scared, and B, in a way I felt it was a bad idea to cut it on. I peek outside my window, and unfortunately, it was way too dark outside to see anything. So I told Smurf I'd call him back. I called my grandmother and asked her to look outside to see if she had saw anyone on the front porch. She yells for my cousin to look outside, and my cousin says she didn't see anyone. Honestly, I don't think she looked good enough. When I call Smurf back and tell him, if I didn't call back in 15 minutes after I showered, I was dead. Of course, we both laughed the situation off, thinking it had to be my imagination. Before I jump in the shower, I called Joe, telling him what was going on. And he was really worried as usual. I told him not to worry and that I'd call him after I showered. He said, if I don't hear from you, I'm coming up. I assured him again he would hear from me and everything would be okay. I grab my clothes and start the shower water, waiting for it to get hot. I get inside the steaming shower, and we had some amazing water pressure, I may add. I loved and still love taking long showers, so that day wasn't any different. Suddenly, I hear a banging sound. I thought maybe I was hearing things and proceeded to shower. Then the noise was growing louder, so loud that there was no way I could ignore it. I hurry out of the shower and wrap my bathrobe around me. I opened the bathroom door and cut off the fan to the bathroom. The sound was coming from the side door to the kitchen. Now, on the side of my parents' house is a screen door and a door that led to steps down to our basement. Or you can walk a few steps up to another door that led into the kitchen. Well, automatically this freaks me out. I call up my grandmother, who finally answers, and I tell her not to come outside but call Dad. I even started calling my parents, but no answer. I don't know why I didn't think to call 911, but I just kept thinking I'd be safer if someone like my dad was here. Well, I grab a knife and stand to the side of the door just in case they make it to the door leading to the kitchen. I prayed no one would come in, prayed that it was nothing. Well, the banging stopped, and suddenly the banging started on the front door. I call my grandmother, who said the police are outside. I told her to make sure because I'm not opening this door for no one. But it was the police, thankfully. My grandmother and neighbor beside us had both called it in. When I answer, I am standing there crying, holding on to the knife like it was my life support. The cop told me to put it down and so on. Well, I see Joe standing outside, and I told the cops I know him. Joe stays with me until my parents got home, and the cops parked outside of my house. Well, to make a long story short, the next morning my dad went to the side of our house and saw someone had busted the screen door. The door to the basement, kitchen, had been dented at the bottom where I guess whoever it was kicking at the door. This really disturbed us, especially me. Made me feel very unsafe, and as I told the story to my parents again, we all knew it had to be someone who knew they were gone. Someone who knew there was a key in that mailbox. But who? Well, word got around in the neighborhood, and that is all people were talking about. I mean, the cops had even questioned some of the neighbors who came out to watch as the shit hit the fan that night. But there wasn't any leads. A month later, my sister's boyfriend said something that sent chills down my spine. That the 36-year-old neighbor, Richie, was obsessed with me. I said, "What do you mean?" Brad, my sister's boyfriend, replied, "He writes poems and stuff about you." I know this cause his little brother told me about it. So I just knew then that it was him. I knew that it had to have been Richie who tried breaking in. Well, I told my dad. And my dad is a thinking man. He will think and think about what you tell him, only making him madder each second it runs through his head. Well, a week later we kept an eye out on Richie. I was outside playing basketball with Joe and a few other kids in the neighborhood. Then Brad walks over a letter that Richie had written to me. Well, more of a poem. It never said anything about the attempt to break in, but talked about how if I knew him, I would love him, and how much he hated Joe. Joe was so angry he begins trying to fight Richie. Of course, Richie ran inside and would not come out. My dad even tried to get him to come out. We called the cops, and the cops really said there was nothing they could do. The poem proved nothing. Richie denied the poem, denied the allegations, even though Brad tried telling the cops the poem was from Richie. The worst part was nothing ever got figured out. Nothing was ever proved, and till this day, I still wonder if it was Richie. Well, I believe it was him, but the scariest part is, what if he did get in? How long had he been watching me? This story is one of 2 incidents that happened to me that will forever haunt me, causing me not to trust a single person. Last thing I heard about Richie was that he got arrested for drug charges, and that he was sleeping with his mother. I will just say I am glad I have never crossed his path again. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 115. Well, that last story was titled on Reddit, The Sounds of Banging. Turns out Richie was doing a lot more banging than we initially thought, wasn't he? I had to reread that last part a couple of times. Jesus Christ, Richie. That's your mum. Ew. And moving hastily on. Thank you very much for all your comments in my previous videos. Thanks, of course, to the individuals who allowed me to use their stories for this video. And, anecdote time. I think the postwoman thinks I'm a bit of a pervert. Now, you see, I order things off Amazon, and you never know when they're going to get here. So if I'm expecting them, I'll make sure I go to bed properly attired to jump up, because I work through the night. So I'm always in bed when the post comes. So I'll make sure I'm properly attired so that I can jump up and rush downstairs, because these people don't hang about. They knock once and then bugger off. Hell, sometimes I'm convinced they don't even bother knocking, they just put the card through the door. But in this case, I wasn't actually expecting the delivery at the door. I thought it'd be another day or so. So I'd went to bed just quite comfy, just wearing boxers, and stopped picturing that, you dirty buggers. And, it was a warm night, so I went to bed that way, and then I hear the door go, and then I realised, oh crap, that must be that package I'm waiting for. A pair of jeans, if anyone's interested. And so I dart up, rush downstairs, because I know, they're not going to hang about. And I kind of half lean out the door. I was like, oh, okay, thank you. And she says my name. I'm like, yeah, that's me, thank you. Trying to take the package off her. And this has actually happened a couple of times before, when I haven't been expecting things, so I've kind of darted down, right? And so I'm obviously not naked, but it might kind of look that way because I'm trying not to let the neighbour see me stand there in my boxers. So she's either so shocked she can't express her delight at what she's barely seeing, or she thinks I'm a complete and total creep. Probably that last part. I really should just start wearing a parka before I go to bed. That'd probably be much better, all in all. Or I could just get up in the morning, and that way I'd be awake and ready by the time the post comes, but I really am a night person. Don't want to give up my nights. It's actually the best time for working as well for me, because it's a lot quieter at night. Better time for recording, if you can. I just wish Royal Mail would send me emails like Amazon does when it's been delivered by them that my package is coming that day. That way I'm prepared. Ah well. Anyway, that was a slightly embarrassing moment today. Not quite embarrassing enough to be a TIFU, but still embarrassing. And with those words, I'm going to leave you for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.